Marine reacts to The Legion of the Damned, Part 2 by Arch. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. So just real quick, I know in the first kind of part, there was a little bit of a tangent, and I ended up confusing them a little bit with the Firehawk. But just from what I do remember, my biggest thing was finding out what their actual origin is. Now, as far as from what I've been seeing in the comments is that no one really knows for sure, but the highly theory that has the most evidence behind it is supposed to be that they're supposed to be created by the Emperor, and that they're his demons, in a sense. And yeah, I mean, hoping he mentions that one. I don't think that one has been mentioned so far in this video. I don't think it was mentioned in the first half, but curious to know more about them. Also, along the lines of who is probably like the worst, like what was the has been their biggest enemy, so to speak, right? I mean, how they fought and everybody to Tyranids. I mean, obviously, I would assume Orcs, Eldar, or Drukhari. I mean, but I feel like, I don't know. I'd just be curious to kind of see like if the Legion of the Damned was ever at any point overwhelmed with the force that they would try to go up against. You know, just kind of throwing that out there. So without talking too much more, let's go ahead and get to the actual video. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification bell right there, and we get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes I'll upload them twice a day. Now I'm working on them whenever I can, and then releasing them at some point the next day. So that way, there's always at least one video coming out that you can enjoy after work at your leisure. I'm still kind of working on this little section of the intro, but we'll see how it goes. In any case, let's go ahead and see what the Legion of the Damned Part 2 has in store for us.
And as we all know, the four Chaos Gods have their own little servants. In fact, they have created their own little pantheons, consisting, of course, of demons, most of which are essentially mindless beings. They are simply parts of a greater whole. You could say that a bloodletter, for example, is merely a sliver of corn, rather than an individual being. In fact, they are warp predators. They are, technically speaking, individual entities, but they have no mind of their own, so to say. They're not capable of complex thinking. They are beings of emotion and instinct at best. And then you have stuff like the greater demons, which are capable of, well, at least to a certain degree, individual thinking, planning, etc., although they are still mostly driven by instinct. It's just that they can plan out things far more effectively. So if their primary instinct is, for example, to murder a buttload of people, it will be able to plan out, set up, and execute a scenario in which it murders a buttload of people. As for the complexity of said plans, well, they depend at least in part upon the deity in question. Khorne, for example, is rarely going to be beating all that much around the bush, while on the other hand, Tzeentch, well, he enjoys a good old-fashioned conspiracy theory, and will weave webs of intrigue so deep and confusing, even the guy who started it barely knows what's going on. And then, of course, there's their favoured servants, the demon princes. Now, again, these are probably the most independent of all of these gods' servants. They still remain corpus mentis, although they have been heavily...
Alright, so just a quick thing about that part about with the demon prince as well. What's the hierarchy as far as demons go? I mean, I would assume, like, how he's kind of explaining it here, you got the ones that are just completely, I guess, not smart and just go based off of instincts. You got the ones who can, he mentioned, can kind of plan now, but still kind of instinct, right? Maybe like in today's world, a predatory animal. Oh, that's actually a bad comparison. But in any case, and then you got next he mentioned the demon prince. I mean, unless there's only like a few levels, but if there's any type of hierarchy, you know, obviously with their respective chaos god being at the very top. Be very curious to know about that.
Influenced by their chosen deity, which means that, again, their goal is probably going to align with said deity, but the means they utilize to get to said goal might vary quite considerably. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that a worshipper of corn might suddenly put into Planzentian level schemes or anything, but they will almost certainly be capable of a bit more subtlety than a greater demon. And I bring this up because now, let's have a look at the Legion of the Damned. With all of that in mind, is it not possible that the belief in the God Emperor as a, well, god, might have created an entity in the warp that is the God Emperor? Now, it does not necessarily have to be the Emperor at all. In fact, it could be an entity entirely...
Actually, the person who I saw wrote the 3 theories of how the Legion of the Damned were created actually mentioned this being the third one and being the one that has the most evidence. So it might have some validity to it. And also, is that the Emperor being a god, I think it was supposed to be considered like being the 5th god, the kind of how we mentioned here. So, yeah. I feel like that would be the most concrete origin story.
Separate from the actual Emperor. However, considering what we know about the warp, it certainly wouldn't be a stretch to suggest that such an entity exists. Though it also has to be mentioned that this is a somewhat unique circumstance. Technically speaking, the Emperor isn't dead, but he also isn't far from it, and at this point, he mostly exists as a psychic being operating the Astronomicon. And hell, we're not even entirely sure if he is aware of what he is actually doing. We don't know if anybody's had any successful contact with him. The latest point of contact we know of for relative certain would be during the Beast Arises, where the Eldar tried to talk to him by charging his goddamn throne room and killing his Praetorians. Eldar fucking diplomacy. Ugh. Anyways, they could not establish any kind of psychic connection to him, or indeed get anything out of him, despite being very, very close to his throne room. They could also not speak to him psychically from a distance, although they were, at the point, relatively speaking, quite close. And we're talking relatively in terms of psychic powers here, which means within the same goddamn solar system. We have, of course, also the ginormous cock tease that was Gilliman wandering into the throne room and then coming out a few hours later telling nobody what happened. My personal theory is that Gilliman wandered in there, saw his father, and just broke down. That is my take on it. I don't think the Emperor spoke to him at all. I think he knew that his father was basically dead at this.
What do you all think about that? Do you think maybe he did speak with him? Do you think maybe, kind of like how he said right here, like he saw him and just wants to kind of be like, hey, put him out of his misery so he's not in this form? But obviously, you know, it's not going to really go down if the Emperor does that. I think there's a video by Major Kill as well that mentions what happens if the Emperor were to die. So I should probably check that out pretty soon. But let me know down in the comments below, what do you think actually happened? Maybe he did talk to him. Maybe he warned him about something. Maybe he told him secrets. Maybe he told him what happened to the Lost Legions. I would very much like to know. Although I do realize now that a lot of people have been saying as well, as far as those 2 Lost Legions, it's more of a... Well, see, there's 2 things behind it. And just a quick tangent. So one of them was the marketing strategy, and it was supposed to be just so people can kind of create their own. I believe it was for the tabletop, from what I remember being told. And 2, people have mentioned at certain points, I don't remember the exact details, but it had to deal with Sanguinus or something, and something with Horus, and it was something along the lines of that they're supposed to be, like, when they all meet up, apparently there's like all these seats for them, but there was 2, I don't know if they call it a pillar, or 2 that were just empty, and that apparently there's probably most likely something really horrible that happened, in that I think it was Sanguinus is the one that people said that he didn't want his chapter slash legion, or keep getting my time frames mixed up, that he didn't want them to happen like what happened to the other two that were lost, because it's definitely seeming like obviously they were taken out by Space Marines. I felt like that was a whole tangent, but just putting that there.
This point, but he couldn't actually kill him either. He couldn't put him out of his suffering because he was necessary. Which is why Gilliman has been reintroducing the idea of science and progress into the Imperium. I might do an entire video on this at some point, but I don't think they communicate it at all. At least, that is my theory. Now, with that in mind, could a being like the Emperor, which at this point exists more like a psychic being than as a corporeal creature, possibly be connected to the warp entity known as the Emperor? Or hell, could he actually have been absorbing this belief and becoming the God Emperor? Considering how much the Emperor knows about the warp, I would say that is far from unlikely, although again, absolutely no precedents exist of that, and hell, I don't even think you could necessarily make a logical argument based off how the warp works, but again, 'tis the warp, it does whatever the warp does. But to return to the point, I still do believe that the idea of the Emperor being a god, although not necessarily the Emperor, confusing, I know, but the warp entity called the God Emperor would almost certainly have access to a fair bit of godly powers. Now, he's not going to be anywhere near as powerful as Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, or Slaanesh, because these beings have existed for far longer. And the basis for their power is also far more primal, far more common. Because even if worship of the God Emperor naturally, considering it is a state-enforced religion, is rather common within the Imperium, it is not as common as getting really, really angry or getting a boner. But he is still actively worshipped by billions upon billions upon billions upon billions upon billions upon fucking billions. So he is definitely going to have some powers. Now let's return to the idea of motivation for the Chaos Gods, because you can discuss a lot whether or not the Chaos Gods are actually sentient beings, and to be honest, they're almost certainly not in our understanding of the word. Khorne is as far removed from our sensibilities and our understanding of sentience as we are to ants. But what we do know is that these entities are at the very least interested in increasing their own powers. Now, whether or not they do this because they know it's going to increase their power, or because it is a instinct, or hell, even just an aspect of their very being, we don't know. But Khorne, feeding off violence and anger, etc., wishes to spread violence and anger. Slaanesh feeds off debauchery and therefore wishes to produce larger quantities of dragon dildos. Nurgle would like more people to get the flu, and Tzeentch wishes to spread communism. Therefore, it would be natural to assume that the being we refer to as the God Emperor would also wish to spread his own influence and power. So first we have to identify what actually spreads / increases his power. Well, being the God Emperor, obviously spreading the worship and maintaining the worship of the God Emperor is going to spread it. Secondly, the God Emperor could perhaps be referred to as a being of order. Now, back way back in the day, there was actually...
Okay, so the way it's being described, at this point, I mean, I understand that the Emperor didn't want people to believe in gods because he wanted them to get weaker and then hopefully later on be able to take them out, right? Now, in this case, though, if they're worshiping, since, I mean, obviously they're worshiping him as a god, or at least like a big majority chunk. I mean, it's technically a good thing because now it's making the Emperor a lot stronger, and obviously it's not going to be as strong as the 4 Chaos Gods, just because, as he mentioned, they've been around for a much longer time and they're very more. I believe the word he said was primal, like, you know, anger, war. The other was change, other being rot, decay, and then obviously sexual desires from Slaanesh. But yeah, I mean, in this case scenario, it seems like actually worshiping the Emperor might actually be a good thing, but with every good thing, there's also always a negative.
actually a chaos god of order. Not the god emperor, but an actual chaos god of order. He was essentially the chaos god of fascism. Everything was to be ordered and proper, and anything and everything that would go against the order of things would therefore have to be stamped out in the most ruthless manner possible. Not the nicest of things, and honestly, I do believe that the Emperor himself would probably deviate from that description, due to the simple fact that, once we read about the God Emperor, it seems like he was genuinely interested in maintaining the human race. That seems to be his core goal and ideology. Therefore, I would probably say that you can't really classify him as a god of order, since that would be naturally very oppressive, and the Emperor never really had a big track record of doing that during the Great Crusade, or, well, you know. He did have to do it occasionally, because occupied planets and all, but most of the time, people enjoyed a far greater level of freedom during the Great Crusade than they do in modern 40k, for example. And of course, it is entirely possible that the God Emperor, or the being we know as the God Emperor, is so different from the actual Emperor that he has turned into this deity, but I would consider that to be a little bit of a stretch. And I think the only real thing we know is that he wishes to maintain the Imperium, because obviously that's where all of the worship is coming from. So he wishes to keep that alive, and he wishes to increase said worship. So how do we go about spreading the idea of the God Emperor as an actual deity? Well, miracles sounds like a pretty good start, like, for example, certain angelic apparitions. That might be something. Or perhaps an army of vengeful spirits. Demons, you might even say, intervening in moments where everything seems lost. You know, where it's going to have by far the biggest level of psychological impact. And additionally, here's an interesting little thing.
Before we get any further, now, what's the quantity of them being able to come in force of, like, is there only maybe like 500 that can come in at one time? Is there, or like if one of them dies, I believe it was said that they turn into like ash or something, so like the body disappears. Now, do more end up coming in its place? Kind of how the whole process goes down, and how many are actually there?
We of course know what demons are, and most people within the Imperium has at least a basic understanding, in that they don't know how the warp works, but they know the warp is bad, and chaos is bad. Therefore, demons must be bad. And here's why that's relevant. When the Legion of the Damned appears and saves somebody's butts, within days, the people who have been saved remember almost nothing about the incident. Now, I would posit that that is because, if you look upon this critically and non-religiously, which, you know, there is a danger that they might do, this starts looking an awful lot like a demonic incursion, doesn't it? A bunch of dudes covered in literal hellfire pop out of the ether in bursts of sulfur and start murdering everything within reach while disobeying pretty much every single law of the physical universe, and then, when all of the bad people are gone, they simply just poof, disappear in another burst of sulfur. Just a tad bit suspicious. And, of course, since the God Emperor doesn't have demons, wink wink, it's best if his loyal subjects don't remember too much about his demons. Which of course means that the Legion of the Damned are those very same demons. They appear as Adeptus Astartes because they are the Emperor's avenging angels. Everyone knows about the Adeptus Astartes. They are a common figure in Imperial mythos, in their history. Very few have ever seen them, but everyone has heard the stories. They appear in the Imperium's darkest hours. They cannot be killed. They slay without pause. They are superhuman saviors. But at the same time, they are also figures of dread. If you don't behave, the Emperor's angels will come for you. And now, when you come to think about it, That sounds exactly like the Legion of the Damned, doesn't it? They slay without pause, they're certainly scary to look upon, and they always arrive in the nick of time.
I was gonna say I wonder what kind of tactics they would use, but I mean, obviously, if you can't, like how you just mentioned that they can't really die and they have essentially unlimited ammo with no reloading, you don't really need tactics. Um, but as far as the people not really remembering seeing them, now is this an effect from the actual Legion itself, or is it an effect from the Emperor that is using his psyker abilities in order to do this? I mean, I feel like it probably may be a mixture of both. I don't know.
Most as if they are bound by certain rules, or instincts, you might say. But Arch, if this is the case, why aren't the Legion of the Damned popping up all over the place, you might ask? Because if them saving the Imperium is what's going to grow their power, obviously they would do it wherever and whenever they can.
I'm going to take a quick guess before he says it. I'm going to say it's probably dealing, because, I mean, that, you know, when he said the wink wink, and these being the demons created by the Emperor, I'm assuming that it takes a certain amount of his abilities in order to make them happen. So he does it at the very last minute, and it probably is using his powers while they are, I guess, quote unquote, activated, and that may be it. It probably just takes a whole lot of power, so he's only going to use it in the direst circumstances.
Well, it's the exact same reason why demons aren't popping up all over the place. There has to be the correct series of circumstances available for them to manifest themselves, even in the relatively brief period that the Legion of the Damned operates. The veil between the worlds has to be relatively thin. Not to the point for a full-on chaos incursion, because again, here's the thing, when demons of chaos pop into the world, their primary goal is to spread, well, chaos, because it's a hell of a lot easier for them to achieve their goals if they do so. And they don't have to worry about the PR of being demons. Their supporters are well aware of the fact that they are demons, so they wish to stay for the long term, establishing portals and even pulling entire planets into the warp to add to their god's domain. The Legion of the Damned, however, really only wants to hang around for just long enough to wipe out the enemy, which means their threshold for appearing is considerably lower. They don't need a fully fledged warp rift, they only need a weakness through which to pass. If this was the case, then we would expect to see an increase in Legion of the Damned activity if the veil between the worlds grew thinner. And as so happens, we recently had an example of just that, with the Fall of Cadia and the full opening of the Eye of Terror and the splitting of the galaxy in two. Chaotic influence grew to a level never before seen, and just like chaos influence grew, so too did the appearances of the Legion of the Damned. Usually, the Legion appears very, very, very rarely, and yet after the Fall of Cadia, hundreds if not thousands of sightings were reported, and bear in mind, anyone who's seen them will forget about the incident within hours and days at tops, which in all due likelihood means that there are thousands upon thousands of sightings that was simply never recorded. As for why the lazy little buggers didn't appear on Cadia, well, mostly bad writing, honestly. No.
So even if people do forget about them, the fact that that type of knowledge still gets around, I mean, he did mention that there's probably several thousand cases where that don't get reported just because, obviously, if the people forget about it, they obviously can't tell it. But I feel like those who have probably mention it to somebody else. So then they end up mentioning it to somebody else as well. And technically, since that person didn't see them and only really has the name and probably maybe a description depending on whatever the person tells them, I'm assuming that that's how kind of the, I guess, stories of these guys got spread around.
No, that is the excuse I'm going to go with here. I am so fucking disappointed that the Fall of Cadia, one of the most infamous and heavily defended fortress worlds in the Imperium, was described over the course of something like 20 pages. God damn it. That was worthy of an entire campaign book in and of itself. There should be volumes of lore based upon all of the heroic instances of resistance, the cataclysmic tank battles, the apocalyptic air duels above the planet, the countless fortress cities fighting street by street. It should have been so much, and it was so little, sadly enough. But to return to the point, this event also
Cadia still has it fresh right here.
Further solidifies the theory that they are in fact demons rather than actual fallen or corrupted space marines of some sort, because they are everywhere at once. Now, even if we assume that they were a fallen chapter, and the Firehawks in particular, we would also have to assume that they have to use the good old-fashioned spacecraft of the time and usual void travel, considering they apparently still possess spaceships. However, they seem to be traveling way too goddamn quickly. The Legion of the Damned has been recorded to be on quite exactly the opposite sides of the galaxy within hours, which is just not possible. Even the Eldar with their webway network can't travel anywhere near that quickly. Not to mention, of course, the fact that they appear on planet, not in orbit and then drop down via drop pods. They literally appear planet-side, and since there's no teleportation signature accompanying their sudden appearance, there is once again no suggestion that they actually appeared through any normal means, like teleportation, or drop pods, or transportation, or really anything else. So no, they are in all due likelihood good old-fashioned demons, which also explains a couple other things, like for example that they can take a goddamn super heavy tank round to the face and simply just shrug it off.
I'm assuming that it's still considered a theory, but there's quite a bit of evidence to really see that they're demons. And I wonder what would I mean, I guess I could kind of see what would happen if they, or at least if that word had gotten out somehow. But then again, if people do forget about it, you know. But okay, so even though there's a lot of evidence, it's not 100% confirmed. But then again, for me personally, I still think that's probably the case.
That's not normal, even for Space Marines, or the fact that when they apparently, quote-unquote, die, they do so in a burst of flames. When one is finally wounded or destabilized, he bursts into flames and fights on with increased vigor for a short period of time before disappearing in a pillar of fire, which again suggests that they're not exactly normal. Though all the way at the end here, I will be pointing out one little thing as well. Games Workshop has been going back and forth on the quote-unquote true identity of the Legion of the Damned for absolute ages. When they were originally introduced, they were kind of a mysterious force, then they were more or less confirmed to be Firehawks, and then in recent writing, they have been casting a lot of doubt on the idea that they are the Firehawks. At the end of the day, nobody really knows because Games Workshop keeps changing their goddamn writing. Currently, at least in my opinion, it makes more sense for them to be demons because they're doing shit that the Firehawks, even if they were corrupted, simply should not be able to do, like traversing the galaxy at the snap of a finger, for example. Even Chaos Forces, who are in direct cooperation with some form of chaotic deity, cannot control the tides of the warp to anywhere near that degree. And that, along with another whole ton of discrepancies, like, for example, the fact that the Legion of the Damned appear to be literally invulnerable, the fact that they die in a pile of fiery nonsense, which would mean that the Firehawks would long since have been extinct, since at last counting there were some 200 of them left, etc. Not to mention the fact that their doctrines wildly vary from that of the Firehawks. Now, the Firehawks were, as the Legion of the Damned are, quite fond of flamers and melter guns, but they preferred to deliver their fiery ordnance from orbit in mass-scale assaults, and they most certainly were not as quote-unquote gentle as the Legion of the Damned is. The Legion has been known to go to fairly extreme lengths to guarantee victory in the past, but the Firehawks were infamous for their firebombing of entire civilian populations just to make sure. Of course, there's always the possibility that the Legion of the Damned have been cleaning out some population centers every now and then and simply nobody's noticed, but, well, let's hope not. Because let's be frank here, the average Imperial citizen has enough shit to worry about already without some brimstone ghost kicking down his door and murdering him and his entire family for wrongthink. But of course, at the end of the day, they are but peasants, and nobody really cares about the peasants. So, even if they did, it's probably fine. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.
Alright, let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Now, didn't have too much to say because I got a lot of it out during the video, but there's two things I really want to hit on. And one of them being that there's still no concrete, solid answer as to where they come from or who exactly they are. But obviously, the biggest evidence being that they are demons, right? Now, the second one, kind of tying in with that, a big part of it might be because, as he mentioned, Games Workshop changing the story, maybe, or trying to retcon things, and I'm hoping I'm using that word right. I've always heard it, but it seems like that's kind of what is happening. But also, just I feel like it's being left to our own interpretation, just so that way it's more mysterious. I don't think there's ever going to be Games Workshop coming out with something that just to say, this is how they came to be, this is who they are, this is why this or that. I just feel like it's always going to be left up to us just be able to make our own interpretation. That's honestly the best way I can put it. Other than that, if you have made it this far, just know, I mean, at least channel-wise, I'm going to be doing a couple chapters from the Traitor Legions. And then after that, I need to start to transition over to the Astra Militarum, or the Imperial Guard. I'm definitely going to be starting out with the wow, God, I almost forgot their name. The Krieg. I'm going to start out with them, just because they're the ones who've really caught my eye so far as far as the Imperial Guard goes. So, and also just a quick little personal thing about me. This one isn't going to be military related. It's more of me when I was coming out of high school. I was into mixed martial arts and had actually thought about doing it professionally for quite some time. But then maybe after a few months, some sparring matches, get hit in the face a couple times. Obviously not that hard. I start to realize, wow, this kind of sucks, or this hurts. So, I mean, I ended up joining the Marine Corps shortly after and tried it again there, but just realized, you know what? I think I'm just going to do it to be able to learn like self-defense for myself. And that was pretty much it. Because imagine if I'm getting hit in the face by someone who's about the same level as me. Imagine someone at a much higher level doing that to you. So, but yeah, that was kind of one of my things. I wanted to be a professional MMA fighter, but ended up choosing something different. Yeah. Still love it though, specifically more jiu-jitsu. Just, it sucks lately just because you can't find a gym, at least close by, or in my area in general, that allows sparring with a buddy. Obviously, they said that you can bring your own buddy, but I don't have any friends in the general area who currently enjoy doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, hopefully one day when everything opens up again. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, check the description down below. You're going to see a list of about 5. Top to bottom is going to be how I view them. Until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.